The views and opinions expressed in the following are those of the speaker and may not represent those of the University of Kentucky. Thank you for listening. A downloadable transcript is available in the description.
I'm Annette Jett, and I'm the Chief Operations and Innovation Officer for Build Inclusion, which is a nonprofit here in Lexington, Kentucky. And we serve people with disabilities that want to find competitive integrated employment in the communities. I completed the graduate certificate in developmental disabilities from the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky in 2014. I had a daughter that was born with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and I was a late blooming parent to begin with, so I was 38 when I had her. And I didn't know much about parenting to begin with. And then by the time she was 5 years old, I realized I also didn't know much about, the world of disability, even though I had kind of been thrown into it. She has a brother that's 20 months younger than her. And what I realized early on is that the plan that we had for our vocational and, home life was going to be changed a little bit based on the fact that we needed more resources. We needed to understand what was available to her to help her be the most successful she could be in her life. And, to kind of surround our family with some wraparound services so that everybody could get what they needed. And so the reason that I wanted to go to get this certificate was so that I could start to understand this field a lot better. I have a business background. I had no idea that I would end up in advocacy. I was always in food and beverage. It's my first love. And of course, when your kids come around, that's your love. And so it was family first, and that's why I wanted to do it. I was kind of introduced to it by another family member that had gone through the LIND program up at the University of Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And so she was really encouraging me to go, and it really, really did make a big difference in being able to access the resources and to understand how to help other families. When you're a parent and you're just we found out in utero that there was something that wasn't developing in her brain that developed in other people's brains, and it was just an architectural thing. It wasn't anything that was could be defined to a cause or something. And so we were just excited to have a child, and we were excited to to be able to bring her into the world. But it was a kind of a wait and see. She had a kind of a rare diagnosis, agenesis of the corpus callosum. And with that diagnosis, some people have it, and they can go for years and years and not even know they have it until they're 30 years old, and they get in a car accident and they go in and get an MRI, and somebody says, oh, by the way, you're missing this. And then they go back and they say, well, maybe that's why math was hard, or maybe that's why social experiences were hard. But it's a spectrum, just like most things are. And, it can go from significant impact of disability all the way to just really not knowing you even have it. So it was a wait and see type of thing. So very indiscriminate, up until maybe she was a year and a half, even though we got her into first steps and things like that. I did a lot of research at that time. And this was still when we had dial-up internet. It was like I can still remember that noise in my head of the ringing tone to get onto the internet, but there wasn't a lot of information out there. And so I found myself often educating doctors and therapists and other people on what this diagnosis was. And so as that became kind of more and more clear that people really didn't know much about that or how it was going to present, it became more and more clear to me that I had a lot to learn too, and that I needed to be able to do that in order to help her, again, like I said, become the most successful person that she can, and to live her life to her fullest potential. And so that was always my motivation. I will say that being a business person and being somebody that has always been empathetic to others is that I thought, well, the least I can do is help us, right? And her and our family, but the most I can do is help other families. So that has always been, it was very intentional to do that. And so that's how we ended up kind of developing the nonprofit Build Inclusion years, at a similar time that I was going through this process. So when I went, Harold Kleiner was still the head or the dean of HDI, and I got the privilege of working with Kathy Shepard Jones as the adjunct professor, who actually ran a lot of our classes and that type of thing. And honestly, I didn't feel like I belonged at all for a long time, and that was internal. It wasn't something that was external that was caused by the university or anything, but it was because, one, I was older. Like I said, I was 38 when I had Gracie, so by this time I was in my 40s. So being a non-traditional student in the past, that didn't really bother me, but I had a good 25 years on a lot of people that were, that I was surrounded by in classrooms. So that lived experience just in those 20 to 25 years, that brings a perspective, living day to day, seeing the obstacles you came across, whether it be with doctors or with medical appointments or teams or treatments or the systems, trying to get resources to assist. I mentioned that, we had to kind of make a whole different plan for our family. At that time, we were in catering. We had a booming business, and, we just had to stop, and we had to go in a different direction. And so, just all of those things impact you, and trying to explain that to people that are in the room that are going to be professionals in the field, I think maybe gave them a better understanding of what parents may be seeing. And I just really didn't even know the full impact even at that point. Like I said, she was 5 when I started, I think 5 or 6, and we were just trying to get through first grade. I will say that, and I think this is in a later question, but I want to go ahead and address it. I finally felt like I was in my element when Milt Tyree walked in and started talking about employment. And I was like, oh, okay, this is something I get. And again, she was trying to get through first grade. We were just getting into school at this point, to public schools. And so I had a big educational focus, but I could relate to the employment piece of it. And I thought, okay, maybe this is where I fit, since I understand that world. I have an MBA from Loyola University of Chicago. And maybe this is somewhere I can fit in to assist other people, in addition to being a person that is a family member and has that lived experience of being with somebody 24/7, because that's what you are with your kids, no matter, right? But especially at that age. So that's really how things were born. It was very organic the way it happened, but I never would have had that opportunity, I don't think, until I got into that room and those rooms and started listening to people and started talking to people about our experiences too. And there weren't a lot of family members there taking that certificate at the time. And I hope that that's changed since then, because I really think it's an important thing to do. I think it's important for both parties. I think it's important for us to learn the other side of what's going on in the world and what's available to us here in Kentucky and what's available to us nationwide or federally. But I also feel like it's important for people to learn, like, what's going on in your own community, what's happening at home, because that's where it all starts. And if parent caregivers and family caregivers aren't given the supports they need, then that can be an issue too, because it's a family thing. There's an entire family that is affected, not necessarily negatively, but differently, right? So you have to learn how to manage that, and you have to learn how to navigate that in a whole different way. So then a lot of parents do. I wouldn't say that than everyone, but it is a different experience. it started kind of, being ingrained into me at that point that was a really important thing. And I agree with self-advocacy 100%, but I do not think self-advocacies are just born. I think that self-advocates are taught, are practiced, are intentional. And so we started at a very young age helping Gracie hone those skills. And she could tell you to this day, what she wants, what she doesn't want, what she likes, what she doesn't like. She's now going to be 19. She next year is going to be, or next school year is going to be working with Project Search. She's going to be going to Bluegrass Technical College for a class in art. All these are scary things for her, but what 19-year-old would that not be scary for, right? So it's exciting because she's had a say in what she is able to do and gets to do. She also lives with her caregivers part-time. So mom and dad have given up a little bit of the reins, to let her go and have that kind of flexibility. But that's what 18-year-olds do. They often live with other people sometimes. And so that's been something that has taught her skills to be able to, to live as a roommate or as a fellow, housemate versus, hey, you're my kid, you live in our house, just like any parent would be. But you want that for your children. You want them to become young adults, have responsibilities, understand that they are a contributing member of any household, whether it's yours or someone else's, and understand that there are responsibilities and different roles that come with that. So it's just it's helped us to help Gracie become a better self-advocate. And I will tell you that I've had the opportunity to work with so many people early on when the pre-employment transition services program started coming out here in Kentucky and was introduced through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. That excited me so much because, again, my daughter was in that age group. And so I knew how that was what was happening at home, and maybe some things that could help other parents and other people help their children become better self-advocates. So I was very involved in creating a curriculum that would catapult people into that next element. And you and I worked on a lot of that together, like in documenting some of that. But it was life-changing, and I saw people's lives change. And to me, that's what made sense. Okay. So when you see a kid come in and they're too shy to talk to somebody, or their parents say they're not going to want to be able to hang out in this group setting, they're not going to get up and participate in that kind of thing. And by the second or third class that we were doing around those types of activities that were very focused on self-advocacy, they were leaving their parents at the door or in the car and running up to, our place to be able to visit with the new friends that they had just made and to tell them, about the new things that they were doing in their life. So it was a really neat experience to see that. And that has diminished in some ways because the programming isn't as active right now. But we're trying to get that back because it's super important. So Build Inclusion, I was a co-founder of that. One of the other co-founders became the board chair right off the bat, and I became the executive director shortly after it was opened. We became an official nonprofit in March of 2015, but we had been working a couple years, a year and a half, a couple years before that, doing things in the community around advocacy, particularly around education. And we would go into the schools and start the elementary schools and start teaching, people about things about access and introducing the word disability, and doing it through what was called they were the extracurricular activities that you do at school, like art, library, science, different activities like that. So we would have curriculum for each of those types of specials that they had each week. And people would get to go through the rotation. And we were really just trying to basically introduce what we felt like are the future leaders, the future architects, the future teachers, the future, friends, and all of that. That's what kids are, right? They're going to grow up and be the next group of leaders out there, the legislators, whoever it might be, the business owners. And so we wanted to teach them that this is just such a natural part of life, and that everybody's different, and it's okay to embrace them and to understand that. And so that was a kind of cool program that we kicked off. It was not sustainable, unfortunately, because there's no funding source around it. But it gave us that little catapult to get into the schools and make a relationship there. I actually became the parent before I went into executive directorship of Build Inclusion. I worked as the parent liaison at Fayette County Schools to help in special ed, to help families kind of navigate the system. And so that was a neat experience too, because it allowed me not only to help families, but to also see where some of the gaps might be. And there are gaps. Be honest, there are gaps in the systems, and until we fill those, it's just like a business. In business, you learn this early on. Until you fill those gaps, not everyone is getting what they need to get. And so that has become a big focus of mine since opening Build Inclusion, is where do we fit in? So we very quickly we had a three-pronged approach from the beginning, which was around educate, engage, and employ. The employment piece became a much bigger piece of it, as I always thought it would be, because of my background, like I had said. And, the nonprofit, as it does, a new nonprofit will go through changes in board members or in the founders stay the same, but they don't always stay throughout the process. A lot of people don't know this. No one officially owns a nonprofit, so I know my name is associated with Build Inclusion, and I love that. And it's because I've helped build it, but I don't own it. It's a community advocacy project. And so anyhow, when we got into employment, we hooked up with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation and became a vendor for them. And we worked to formally get people jobs. We went through multiple trainings, and when I say we, I was the only employee for, the first two, maybe 2.5 years. And then we were able to hire more people. But I will say that the nonprofit is now almost 9.5 years old, and I will be officially retiring from that in a month or so. So that would be my official retirement, but it doesn't mean that I won't be still involved and be able to take that experiences with us. So it's been a neat experience. We have gotten hundreds of students and people that are transitioning from high school into the adult world. We've gotten hundreds of people jobs. We have worked with thousands of students across the state. We actually, I was invited in to work with the educational cooperatives. I was invited to even come in and do some training for them. And that was on a personal level, but with the data that we had from Build Inclusion and that kind of thing. But to teach the co-ops how to train people to become self-advocates and how to teach these things in schools through pre-employment transition services and other funding that was available. So it's been a very, very neat experience. It is so cool to watch somebody's life change because they get a job or because they're accepted into a workforce, or an employer's given them a chance and they meet a new team of people. It's a different experience. That's life-changing for anybody, right? When you get a job, job money is the first thing people think of, but a job is so much more than that, right? It's new friendships, it's networks, it's new ways to experience the world. And I feel very strongly that everybody should get those opportunities. I would say that, my biggest aha moment probably was, and I've mentioned this before, but when Milt came in and talked, and I'd never met him before, I didn't know who he was. Milt Tyree, he's very experienced in the field. And then when he came in and gave his presentation, I mean, I just latched onto him. I tell my kids the answer is always no unless you ask. And so I asked him if he would be my mentor, and he was. And we would meet for coffee, and we would do things outside of the certificate, even though he worked in conjunction with HDI. And he was very involved in customized employment. And so I became trained in customized employment before that became a big push in Kentucky. And then so once I went through that training, I was able to then, we did get a grant through for that. And I was able to send other people through that were from our staff. And the training itself is just phenomenal. And that's recommended. I recommend that to anyone because there's a discovery process that goes along with getting people jobs. You don't just run out and grab somebody the first job that you see, which is the same as, again, you would do for anybody else, right? Or anybody else would try to do for themselves. You know, you have to know what you like, what you don't like, what conditions and environments are going to be good for you, that type of thing. So the discovery process really is like the most phenomenal piece of supported employment, because you get to learn so much about that person. That's another reason that I really loved the pre-employment transition services, is because we could start with students earlier and kids earlier and young adults earlier, and we could start with them and we can learn, like, you know, maybe where they excel, where maybe they need some work, where they take on leadership roles, when they feel more like a follower. You know, you could see that through this process. So while that might be ancillary benefits or requirements to what's going on within the pre-ETS world, that was just like priceless. You can't get that by, you know, just asking questions of someone. I think I also got kind of catapulted into a whole new world of people. And I will, you know, again, mention Harold Kleinert. He was very, you know, impactful to me. And I joined things like the Commonwealth Council on Developmental Disabilities, and I became a council member there. And, you know, that's a governor appointed position. And for just little, you know, just a mom, I was just like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. But there were so many people in there from so many different agencies, from so many different, you know, backgrounds, from so many different parts of Kentucky. And so I listened and I learned and I talked and I asked questions. And I'm going to tell you, the one thing that I did not do is I never said no to anything. If somebody asked me to attend a health and wellness seminar or become certified in that, I did it. I'm not the most healthy or well-fit person, you know what I mean? But I would do anything. I would say yes to everything, because it was really important to me to just dive fully in and immerse myself into the process, you know. And I'm never going to have that experience of someone that was born with a developmental disability, but I do have that experience as a parent of someone that was. And so I think that we have to take all of these different perspectives into play. And I will tell you that because of all these combined experiences that I've had, and the direct service that I did, and the, you know, the back of house things, and all the things that I got to do at Build Inclusion too, and working on councils and through the years, you know, I mean, my skill sets range from, like I said, hands-on all the way up into policy. And so now my focus is on macro issues, like how can we help the people that are doing work like Build Inclusion is, how can we help those people then do better work, and what needs to change in order for that to happen. And if we're not willing to change as a community or as a state or a society, then nothing's going to change. And I will also say that another impactful thing that I learned through the certificate and just through my experience is that a lot of times parents led those changes. And so I feel like I bring a wealth of different lenses to the field. You know, I've been in the education piece of it. I am the parent. I employed people with disabilities. I have helped people with disabilities get employment. So as a provider and all of that type of thing. So I really feel like that's important. And that is something that, you know, it is valuable. And will help me continue to contribute to the community. So I'm not leaving. I'm just not going to be in the same role I have been for the last several years. It can never be just a one-sided way here. And I mean, there is no one way to do anything. I mean, even in supported employment, there's 3 different models that we've learned, and we're one of the only at Build Inclusion places in Kentucky that has been able to offer all 3 of those models. So there's the IPS model, there's the traditional supported employment, and there's customized. And even with all of those disciplines within the supported employment field, they all have a little bit of a different take. And there are some factors that set them apart from the other ones. Pre-employment transition, that becomes a different type of thing too. So you have to be able to, I think, working in an interdisciplinary team and being able to understand where other people are coming from, but also to be a voice for those who maybe aren't able to share their voice. It can't be just like, you go do this because we said so. It can't be like that. It has to be teamwork. It has to be, okay, we're willing to give a little, you've got to be willing to give a little. This is what's working, this is not what's working. And that's why I feel like I'm most suited for these macro issues, because I have learned to get that voice. And I mean, I think back to when I was on the DD Council, and in the very beginning, and one of the first persons that I met there was Keith Hosey, and he has been our board chair for about the last 7 years at Build Inclusion. But I met him because he was the policy chair on the DD Council, and he was a person that was born with a developmental disability. He was and he wouldn't mind me telling you that, but he also was a consumer for Voc Rehab. And one of the first things I got to do was go to DC and talk to people in, congressmen and senators from Kentucky about issues that Kentucky was facing. And so around disability. And so just learning so much about that. But I think back to that time, and there was something going on here in Lexington where they were rebuilding some of the parks, and I had been asked to talk about accessibility and universal design. And I remember bringing that to the council and saying, is this something that could be just brought up so that people understand that it's out there? And I was encouraged by the people that were there to do that. And I remember how timid I was and how I got up, and I just, barely could find my voice. And now I not only have a voice for people, or try to be a voice for people with disabilities and for parents, but I also try to be a voice for those people that are providers and that are trying to help people get to that next level, because we have to come together and we have to be heard. I guess that's it, right? Like, everybody wants to be heard. And I think that unless we have an open and adaptable system, that's not going to happen. So I think that's why being in an interdisciplinary team and knowing the different pieces and the different parts and how it works together and how it doesn't work together is very helpful. I mean, I met some people that I just truly admire, people that have become my mentors, people that have become my friends, people that have become, I don't look at anybody as competition, but I think that there's been people that, that have listened to challenges and things that, that we need, that we have, and as parents and as providers and as people that are just trying to help people with disabilities along, and people that, I feel like we've been a partner in so many different ways. And I think that was one of the things that was really important to me about the graduate certificate, was that it helped me become a partner. It helped me become recognized. I don't often bring it up anymore that's what I did, but that's really how I started. That's how I started. I would have had not a lot of opportunities to learn what I did and to be in those rooms with the people that I was. So like me or not, HDI built me. And built me into a strong advocate with a voice that is, that is being heard, I think, and that is valuable and will contribute to better outcomes for individuals, and hopefully for families too, because there's some family work I do. There's a lot of things I do on the side. I love the fact that I get Facebook messages, I get calls, I get texts, I get emails, I get so many different things from so many different people asking me so many different questions about so many different issues that their child or they or somebody they know are facing. And I love that people look to me as a subject matter expert, as a parent advocate, because that's really what I am. But I got my start in that, obviously becoming a parent to Gracie, but secondly, getting my graduate certificate at HDI. And so that was really what started the whole journey. And so I graduated in 2014. I will say I took it very slowly because I was a parent at the time, right? I was a parent of small children at the time, and my mother had Alzheimer's too. So that was a different kind of take on it, and things that I was thinking about as caregivers would come into her home and things like that, and as we were planning for her, her illnesses. But the people that we serve at Build Inclusion, and the target audience that we have is that group that is in transition from that, from high school into adulthood. And I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to start planning for that when Gracie was small, because it has paid off, and it is paying off. And I obviously can't take all the credit, but I helped to navigate and direct that. And I'm going to give Gracie a ton of credit, because she stepped up and taken the ball and run with it. And then also her caregivers and the people that have supported us and our family have been just instrumental in making that happen. And we've been lucky enough to have the same caregiver and families involved for the past 6 years. And we're even taking a family vacation with them. That's how good it's going to Mexico soon. So, so it's a neat thing when that happens. But I know I'm very lucky, but I think it came with a lot of planning and a lot of really trying to make sure that everybody, kind of was on the same page about the mission that we were on. And that, I'll say, working in an interdisciplinary team, when you have multiple people working with your child, you do have to give and take a little bit, and you have to listen to other people and that type of thing. And I think that we've done that really well, and have a good I guess a good story to tell in how it can work, because I truly think that Gracie will be very independent as an adult. I feel like I can call on people there. I feel from the top level across the board over there. There's so many people that are so well educated and so very involved in making life better for people here in Kentucky, and they know me and I know them, and they know my motivation. And while we don't always agree on everything, I think that the outcome, I used to say this all the time, is that focus on the outcome, and the income will follow, because even as a nonprofit, you have to have the income to keep that business alive. I mean, again, going back to my business background, but I think that everybody needs to be focused on the outcome. I think that I love the fact that I can call on HDI and the people that are there, and that, again, it can be an interdisciplinary approach to getting to solving issues, right? And that's the thing. I like to be solution based, but to get to the solutions, and this is the same thing in any business. And I'm back in restaurants a little bit too. My husband owns one, so if you don't know the problems, you can't fix them. And so if we can, we can't always focus on the positive, even though there's a lot of positive things happening, but we can take a solution-based approach to solving issues that are still presenting barriers to successful outcomes and to the future of the Commonwealth. So that being said, I will say that my next role has become being the CEO of a newly formed member advocacy organization for providers like Build Inclusion and other CRPs, which are community rehabilitation providers, because we need to have a collective voice that is represented. And so I feel like I have earned my stripes in becoming that, because I've done every single piece of that business from the CRP side of it. And then I have the additional experience that we have already talked about. So it's kind of just, if you lay it out on paper, it all makes sense. If you see it up, it doesn't always make sense. But I feel like, I feel a responsibility to continue the work and to take it to that next level. And let's see some systems change, and let's do that together. So that's one thing I think I still look back to HDI with very fond memories, and I look forward to HDI with with fondness and with respect, and want to continue to build on what they've taught me, because we can all learn from each other.
This year's deadline for application to our undergraduate certificate in universal design or graduate certificate in developmental disabilities is July 26th. Additional information can be found at the link in the description.